And let's see. Bishop c4. Okay. So Carlsen tries to wander out of theory quickly once again. Yeah, and this is one of the main recommendations for how to face like 2 bishop c4 in e4, e5, at least that like I heard from like back when I was a beginner. And you know, the idea is that this bishop actually oddly helps black win control over d5 because it's got all these like knight fork tactics, right? Like you can't play knight c3 here to counter knight f6 because of knight e4. Well, you can, but then you're playing the Frankenstein Dracula, right? You all know the center fork. So after knight e4, white usually plays queen h5 here. Yeah, the game yesterday between So and Report was insane. I like playing through it, like I just didn't know how to evaluate the position or what was coming, which is awesome. So this bishop on c4, strangely, you'd think one of the benefits is it's controlling d5, but because it's so exposed to this d5 move by black, it actually gives a lot of tactics to black, and one of them is, you know, so they get you to play d3, which doesn't control d5, but only e4, then c6, and now it looks like d5 is just coming through. But after knight f3, by Carlsen, Wei Yi just played the calm d6 defending his pawn instead of the move d5. And I think the point here from white is that you can play like bishop to b3. And black's achieved d5, and then once they achieve d5, they suddenly find these 2 pawns under immense pressure, and it's not obvious what to do next. For example, taking on e4, knight e5 is kind of obviously not good for black, I think. And now you can't play knight c6 to defend your e-pawn, and if you play bishop d6, you're blocking the queen's defense of this. So then, you know, after like bishop g5, or maybe even they play ed, cd, bishop g5, you can find white having a lot of pressure on this point. So I don't know much theory about that. I just know it's like this like recommendation. I've played it in a bunch of blitz games, but I don't actually know if it's good or bad. And interestingly, Wei Yi like plays c6, but then doesn't actually go for d5. Now playing c6, you would think like it mostly makes sense if he plays d5 next, right? Otherwise, you know, he could play bishop c5 here or knight c6 or something, right? So you'd think c6, the only logical reason for it would be to play d5 the next move. That doesn't mean his position is necessarily bad after d6, but it does feel illogical. Like, it does feel a little bit illogical. So yeah, so now we get basically like a Gioco piano where the bishop's on e7 instead of c5. I'm going to guess that's a disimprovement for black, that the bishop's less active here than here and slightly in the way of rooks and queens. So maybe a small edge for white out of this opening. So quickly for Carlsen, I guess because Wei Yi didn't want to go into that critical line with d5. It looks like he was aiming for it with c6 and then hesitated and changed his mind to move later, which is a bad way to choose your openings. Oh, Outsmider points out an important little tactic. Sorry, guys. He points out that knight f3, d5, bishop b3, d e4, that this move here is a blunder because of queen a5 winning the knight, of course. So that means that white must take here first and then retreat. And so this is the position. And now I guess black has room to play knight c6 if they want to. Huh. I know. I remember that Wei Yi's a really good player, and you should know. People make a lot of mistakes in underestimating on the strength of players when commenting from home. You're like, oh, look at this guy blundering against Carlsen. Oh, look at this guy blundering against Carlsen. What was he thinking? Well, he's like a really, really good player, and you're in no position to say that about him. But I am just making my best personal guess here, you know, and I could definitely be wrong about it, but my personal guess is that the only point of c6 is to play d5. and to then not play d5 on the next move, something seems to have gone. It means I'm suspecting that something's gone wrong with black's opening. But then, as I said, like, I would guess that this position is a small edge for Carlsen right away because of this. But as I play through the game, I'm going to find out if that's true or not, right? Like, if it turns out that the black position is totally fine here, then I'm going to revise the estimation that I made where c6, d6 didn't make sense. You see? But, like, I definitely understand there's a far higher chance of Wei Yi being right than me. But I still, as I analyze and think about a position, I have to make my own hypothesis and then see what I can learn about it being right or wrong as I go. So knight bd7, rook e1, knight c5, and kicks this bishop back. Okay, so now it looks like white's probably going to want to play d4 quickly next, right? It seems like his bishop's now not more active than the black bishop because it's been kicked back, but you have to understand this knight c5 kicked it back, and it seems like easy for white to play d4. No, this is the same camera I've always been using. I'm surprised that people suddenly are talking about the camera today. This could be de facto bad for black. It could, in theory, be bad to have played c6, a move where the consequence is d5, and then not play the consequence d5. Now, yes, it's more likely that Wei Yi knows something more about it, but my chess understanding, which is, you know, has its limits and is hopefully going to expand right now. That's the point of doing this. But my chess understanding tells me that that's not good for him. Maybe it's just better lighting. That would actually make sense, yeah. Because, you know, actually, it was rainy and cloudy in the last 2 months in the area. And so I didn't have the kind of nice natural light that I have today because we finally have a clear day. Maybe it's just that. All right, so back to the game. So he develops the bishop, and now we don't see Carlsen play d4, even though that's what I thought he was going to play. What's wrong with d4 here? This seems quite good for white. If he goes here and takes, now taking, takes seems risky for black. And if he takes, and takes, this should also be pretty good for white. I don't see why not d4 here, huh? Is there any tactic with like knight taking on e4 and then d5, e4 or something? I don't think so. Because here you attack this, and even on f5, like worst case scenario. Well, now you also have queen b3 to get out of things, right? So you can come here, here. I was going to say worst case scenario, you can just take it, but worst case scenario, you could also just do this and be up a whole piece. Yeah, I don't see the problem with d4. Well, let's just see a little bit more what happens. He develops, goes here, fighting for d4, h3. Maybe what? Maybe Carlsen isn't playing d4 because in this position he wants to first question this bishop and see if it goes to h5. If the bishop goes to h5, even better than gaining a central advantage can be to sideline the bishop. So that's why he didn't go for d4. Now it dawns on me. If the bishop had traded on f3 here, then maybe he would play d4 soon hereafter. But once the bishop goes here, now actually he's going to decide he wants to leave this pawn here and probably put a pawn here and try and restrain this bishop. Let's see if that's true. Yep. Okay, there it is. So the reason he doesn't want to play d4 several moves ago was not because d4 was bad, but because he had another strategic plan to play against this bishop. And now you want the pawn here to help lock in that bishop. And Outsmiter agrees the d4 wouldn't have been wrong. It's just a different idea. Yeah, and now that I realize what Carlsen was going for, as I'm getting acclimated to the game, I prefer what he did. The biggest rating upset I've ever seen, I don't know. I mean, I think there have been players rated like 1 or 200 who've won games against players rated like 1,000 or 1,200. But if you mean with like grandmasters, I don't think I've seen a grandmaster to lose to anyone below 2,000 really. So among more serious players, maybe the biggest upset I would have seen would be about 500 points. Here, g4, black doesn't have a second piece to sack on g4. So there's no danger of one of those sacks. This g4 move is a very important move to play sometimes, and you see white's got enough like knights on this side of the board to cover things, even if there was a piece for 2-pawn sack. Okay, bishop g6. Interesting. He trades off his good bishop here. But see, even if he trades the knight instead, this bishop will come here and trade his bishop. So that's why... So, I mean, you can see Wei Yi's idea here with knight d7. His idea was he sees g4 as coming, and so he's preparing to come here and trade pieces and look for weaknesses in Carlsen's dark squares. So you see, he immediately comes here, and now Carlsen's dark squares look weak on this side of the board, which is the weakening that he had to take on to try and sideline this bishop, and it's actually hard to say immediately if that's better or worse for him. And now he ends up going for d4 anyway, having made this trade. Trying to put some pressure in the center. Yeah, I guess with black having played knight d7, there's really... His e-pawn's pretty well defended, and he's now traded a dark squared bishop for a knight, so e4 is really solid anyway. So he just needs to fight for some control of the dark squares, which are so weak. Interesting. It's not obvious to me that Carlsen's better here. I mean, he does have that bishop a little bit sidelined, but his pieces don't look that active, and Wei Yi doesn't have any weaknesses. There are ways to eventually extricate this with f6, bishop f7, or just to, use the counter weaknesses. Now I'm not that convinced of Carlsen's plan. I feel like Wei Yi's in the game. I don't know. Okay, so some simplification, which he kind of initiates by taking here. I think Carlsen doesn't take with the pawn into the center. Instead, he gets the knight because he wants to play this f3 move. So now the bishop on g6 is really sealed, so black has to play either d5 or f6 at some point. And the d pawn is slightly weak. Yeah, Carlsen's happy about that. Now he's just got like a technical position that he can work. Slight weakness, slight weakness. So 2 things for black to deal with. Yeah, so the way to break this out, this seems most promising is d5, also solving the problem with the d file, and then white can just play e5 and f4 with a big advantage. Trading one advantage for the other, right? The bishop is no longer a problem, but now white's got this nice space here. I wonder how crushing the space is, though, with queens off the board. I mean, usually this pawn structure favors white if they can attack on the king side. You know, if you put this pawn here, it's pretty much the structure of the game that Carlsen won, the only game he won in the World Championships against Karyakin. Okay, so here he is. Gain some space. Man, Wei Yi's really like trying to fight back here. I don't think I like the plan of pinning black's hopes on this knight on e4, because it seems like white just has a counter plan of playing c4 at some point. But I mean, how good or bad is this position? What if black plays, I don't know, knight e6 and just tries? Then they're always worse. You don't want to trade on d4. White can always play knight f5. Hard to say. Yeah, I guess like I assume white's better, but I haven't played these positions enough to be able to like predict these moves or plans very well. Like b4, does that mean that he was scared that black would play c5? Oh, it means if he wants to play c4, he doesn't want c5, knight move, d4, but rook e4. Huh, I don't know. And Wei Yi attacks also on the side where he's got the minority. Now c4, c5. Okay, that was definitely... This is crazy. They are... Okay, I don't understand what's going on, but I can tell that they're fighting very, very intensely here. This is a sharp position instead of a slow grind. Can you guys tell that as well? Like, there's not that many pieces on the board, but they are fighting extremely urgently for something important, positionally speaking. And we need to determine what that is. I suppose if he doesn't play knight e4, Magnus is probably going to play b4 anyway really soon. And then he has to choose between knight e4 and like some sorry retreat. Yeah, so I mean, if black doesn't want to go knight e4, then they have to basically be prepared. If I like pass for black for a move, they need to be prepared to defend this position, this position. I've already said why I think, well, I didn't really explain well why I thought knight e6 is bad, but I'll explain it again. You never want to trade on d4 because after cd4, this pawn becomes even stronger and it's easier for white to push on the king side. Plus, white has, you know, some potential pressure on the queen side pawns like this. So your pawn majority becomes useless once white plays cd4. So you never want to take. So that's like bad to set up this kind of tension where you can actually never take them. It means you just have to defend your knight and you can never really take. And white can easily go like f5 or knight f5 in these positions when they want to. So if you don't want to play knight e4, I think you're pretty much relegated to playing like this kind of passive knight d7 defense. And then maybe what white does is this, preparing f5 and e6. Oh, can they also just play e6 right away because knight e6 is check? I hadn't planned that before because I just marked time. I hadn't planned king f8 for black. So in my head, black's king was on g8. So let me get rid of that tactic for a second for us so we can consider this. So e6 now, I don't think it's that great for white. It trades your e pawn for the f pawn, which can be good if you like take over with your pieces afterwards, right? Like there could be some scenario where you're super active, but here I think black has time to, you know, play knight f6 and deal with this. So I'm not happy about giving up the strong e5 pawn for the f pawn here. So what I was thinking is that white sort of like plays here, defending this more to prepare f5. and then, you know, king f4. And you have to be prepared to just like sit here. And black's low on counterplay. I guess the counterplay would be rook c8, b6, and then c5. You can't play b6 because of knight c6, so it'd be something like this. You can also play c5 at some point, shattering your pawn structure, but I feel like that probably wouldn't go well. So let's try here. Here. Yeah, so the problem with this is like at the right time, white can play this. And then maybe even here. And attack things from this side. And c5, 92. I don't know if this is totally even, like you're saying, Super Patzer. I think there's something intense going on here, and we don't yet really know what it is. So here, I'm like really guessing on all of these moves. I played this move to avoid rook c3, and now actually I should have traded on c5 maybe. No, then I didn't want rook c5. Then I have rook e7. Check here. It's messy, right? Okay, but so maybe I should do this. If the pawn takes, then I'm open to attack here. And this is what I was afraid of, leaving me with this weak pawn. But now I'm thinking maybe white can sack. Here, check. Something like this. So now this is threatened. It's got to go somewhere. So let's say here. And then follow with this move. And just attack on the king side. I mean, it's messy. It's definitely still messy. I don't even know if it's any good. You know, there would also be an idea like this kind of move here, and then g6, trying to back rank mate the king. This is another way to play this kind of thing. And then, well, let's say he trades off so that you don't queen, and do something like this. You play here, right? And if the king heads back this way, you create a mating attack, and if the king comes out, then you've got this really far advanced pass pawn. So there's like a few ways to push this. This definitely looks my first instinct, but again, like Chess Patzer UK is saying, like it could just be influenced by the result, right? Like white won and white is Magnus Carlsen, so every position we're like, yes, I'm starting to understand why white was better. And maybe I blundered rook g3, g6 in that exact line. Cool. Let's see. Where was my super long line? Right, then in this line, instead of playing king f8 or knight f6 or anything, rook g3, g6, and he wins. So yeah, so you can't play g6 here. But again, like that depends on a lot of things. Like it depends on where you put your king here between g2, e2, f4, right? Which I wasn't sure where to go. I didn't go to f4 because of maybe this move, but you can always play king e3 now. So that was probably like not a significant consideration. Anyway, there's a lot of, yeah, and now you're saying like maybe the king shouldn't have gone to g2. I mean, it could have also gone to f2. Could have gone to e2 to be close to the rook and take away some of its operation and to keep its eye on this pawn. The only reason to come here is to defend this pawn, which is frankly not the most important. So king e2 is probably the best move. Actually, now that we think about it a little bit more, and you know, maybe the knight should go to c5 here, just to stop knight e6 and not get in the way of this g5 move. And you know, white probably plays g5 anyway. And it's a mess. It's a mess. But this is the kind of thing that black definitely needs to be watching out for. What this kind of e6 could look like. Yeah. Anyway, that would be the other way to play for black other than knight e4 is like that. And I think it's significant that to keep in mind that the plan for black is going to be to play b6 and c5. Anyway, so he goes knight e4. So going knight e4, he knows that white's going to be able to counter him with c4. And his plan is that before white cracks up this and creates a weakness, he wants to crack this pawn structure. That's why he's cutting off the rook's defense of e5. So this knight e4 move is definitely has this g5 move as the intended follow-up. The next point that we want to understand here is why white wouldn't play c4 right away here, right? Why the preparatory b4 move? I think that's like a big question, because I think we can understand why c4 is desirable. The point is, if I again mark time for black, that we can play cd. Since this knight needs defense, black has to take this way. Now suddenly our knight's amazing, and this pawn is weak, and white gets the c-file, right? So now plays like this. And now instead of using this strength here, white's actually going to, possibly shift this rook through one of these files to get to the 7th, and he's going to have knight f5 to coordinate with this stuff. So white's just going to be super, super active here. And any thrashing black does with g5 and f6 now, white will be active enough with the pieces to just win with piece play. So that position is going to be straight out bad for black if they let white play cd and rook c7. Obviously, you could mitigate that a little bit if you played rook d7 here, and then takes, and at least you didn't allow rook c7. But my feeling is that this is still an achievement for white to make this trade and be the one possessing the c-file at the end of all this. So, yeah. I mean, we could try to go into more detail, but I'm going to say that's an achievement for white, and we're gonna look at some more tactical stuff, because if he played b4 instead of this, it means that there's some fear of black playing either c5 or maybe just retreating the knight now and then taking on d5 with a rook instead of a pawn. I don't see how the point would be to retreat the knight, though. Oh, but Outsmiters come up with the same idea at the same moment, that maybe the idea is just to bring the knight back and then to be able to just play like this and keep all black's pieces out. And black's super solid and low on weaknesses here, and maybe active enough that this stuff isn't really going to hurt them. I understand the knight's hanging this time I see it. Just come back knight c5. But see, if he's just coming back knight c5, then what's he planning to do about b4? Like, take here? Take... Take here. And now come here. Knight f5. Huh. I guess I could see why black might play here, but it still seems a bit better for white to me. I don't know. Okay, well, maybe that's the whole idea. But let's just look at this move for a second. Takes, right? So now I play knight g5 check. Here. Now I take here, attacking this rook. It's got to keep this pawn defended. Here. Here. See? There's a real reason. It's just tactical. Well, no. There's more to it. That's a start. Hang on. We could move our knight after c5, right? And then this is even more undermined. So, knight here, what's the point? Yeah, I'm stupid. Which you guys are going to start shouting in about 1 second. Oh yeah, knight g5, that line is definitely good for black. But I think the problem for black is if this is that white wants to just move the knight and leave this as like a problem. And what does black do? d4, this takes, any other move, he's collapsing. This isn't right. So black can't, I don't think black can play c5 here, because you just move away. And this thing is still a disaster. But oddly, in the game, he plays c5. What if the knight had moved then? Why didn't white go for that, right? Basically, okay, some crazy moves as well, some extra things hanging, but basically it's the same idea, right? That if this goes, I take this, and where are you moving this piece in the meantime? So, I don't know, here and here and here and here, and where does this go? Actually, wait, looking at the PGN, I think that's kind of how the game actually ends. Hang on. Okay, sorry. So back to the game for a second. c4 gets played here. Black plays c5, and white does just move the knight away. And then black trades here, has nowhere to move the knight, and then resigns with his knight trapped. So I don't know why Magnus went to b5 instead of f5, but it seems like either way, black just loses when they play c5. So I think the c5 move is losing. Right? Because this knight on e4 is like trapped, and once you play c5, you can't actually keep it defended. So I don't think b4 is to prevent c5. I think actually you guys are right. It's to prevent the knight coming back to c5. So I'll just say, like, in the final position, for anyone wondering, like, one tactic is that if rook takes d5, white has knight c7, and then all three pieces are hanging. Right? So there's no, like, winning this piece. So this final position is definitely winning for Magnus. Wait, what about this move? Hang on. He could play this move. That doesn't lose a piece, right? Now d6 looks attractive, but there might be some hope with f6. So actually, maybe this move. And then I just want to take here. And then white would be ahead of pawn, plus just like crushing this whole central area and threats of rook c7. So black can't double attack on either of these here, and black probably just loses this rook endgame. So that's why they actually resigned, okay? So they could go knight c3. Sorry. Black could go knight c3 here. White takes and plays rook d3, and then wins this rook and pawn ending. Yeah, after this. Okay, so if we're all agreed on that, the c5 move seems like the losing move, leaving this knight unable to move. And I'm still, like, just not quite sure why he played b4. So, like, c4 instead. Knight c5. That must be the thing. Okay, so now if we play, like, knight f5, maybe black can play d4. So I feel like my b4 move is about right. Play b4. Takes here. This makes sense so far, right? Where else? Knight a4. Knight a4 is playable, if not like super impressive. It threatens knight b6, and you know the knight won't be stuck on a4 for long. I guess it's about as good as knight d7. So that'd be fine. So black has an alternative. They don't even need to play this knight e6 move if they don't want to. If white wants to win, they probably need to avoid the knight trade. I feel like white only has a minute advantage here. Or in the knight a4 to b6 instead of this. I think, yeah, white's advantage is minimized, is not that huge. So he plays b4, presumably to trap this knight and to lock in the idea of c4 and take when the c pawn would have to take. And then Wei Yi's like fighting desperately to try and break his knight out of here. But g5, the strength of the king is it can just come up and keep this rook out. You know, if Magnus's king were on g1, imagine this for a second. Imagine his king's on g1 instead of f3. This whole knight e4 g5 plan would work. Okay, these are the important things to ask yourselves to sort of calibrate which plans you think do or don't work, right? You don't want to just be like, oh, white won, let's throw out everything black did, it was all wrong. You remember that, like, the guy playing black was super, super good, and they were using a plan which must be plausible in some positions. The question is, does it work well enough in this exact position or not, right? And here it didn't quite work. But I think a critical feature of this whole thing was the activity of the white king helping to support this pawn structure. Because otherwise, g5, if you imagine the white king on g1, you would think that white's whole structure is going to collapse, right? They're going to lose the pawn on e5. Black will defend the knight on e4 easily. And white might even be losing with the king on g1. Not just like, oh, they can't win or prosecute their advantage, but they might just lose. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So should the knight go to e4? Probably not. And then get trapped, and then... Could black just close things with f6, you're wondering, instead of having tried g5? So now they're threatening to take, and white doesn't want to take. So you're thinking that then we get the position with e6 and f5, and the question is, can black defend that position? That must be what you're thinking, right? So I'm assuming your question is, you're assuming that white will now have to play e6, which seems right. I think that's right. I mean, we definitely can't let black play rook e5 and support everything with that rook. Taking is nothing. Yeah, okay, so you're assuming e6. I agree with you. Now you can't play f5 because white's got it covered, so white's going to get f5. And now what does black want to do in this position? No more trapped knight, but we have a protected passer on e6. I think MCJGP is saying exactly what I would say to you about this position. Like, yeah, the knight's no longer trapped, but this position is grim. This is too much space and too scary a passed pawn to make any claims like black's equal. I mean, you could say this could be better than what he did in the game, because what he did in the game lost outright in 3 moves, and you could certainly be right about that. But if we're asking ourselves, like, at what point could black have had an okay position, I'm going to say it's not here. Yes, the black knight is improved. It has the d6 square now as well as e4. Everything's working well. It can also get c4. You can try and blockade the game, but I think white puts a pawn on f5 and then eventually goes for h4, g5 as one plan. And, you know, his king's active on f4 at this point. And I don't think you can survive that amount of space from white and that strong a passed pawn. So I would guess that this is like not just a bad position for black, but technically losing already. I'm not the most experienced at making those evaluations, so it could be wrong, could be overstating it, but I'm feeling close to hopeless for black here. The white king activity is like amazing. Is c5 no good for black? Yeah, c5 is no good for black. I mean, for one thing, white doesn't even have to take. White would love you to trade like this, right? So don't want to automatically take there. Oh, if I move the knight, there's this. Yeah, so this is one case where I do automatically take. Then I play f5. Yeah, and again, I just agree with MCJGP that the opening of the queen side just gives white more ways to capitalize on what this e-pawn is doing in terms of cramping black. It gives white more avenues to go after things. And I think white will soon hereafter play c4 to get that trade, and they're looking to eventually invade the 7th rank to try and win the game, I would guess. It seems pretty close to winning for white. So the knight e4 adventure doesn't seem to quite work out. Here you couldn't play f6 because of e6 as well, and white follows up. So kind of struggling to say what black should do in this position. And oddly, rook ad8 is almost making me wonder if he shouldn't have just put the rook on c8. Or maybe before the white king gets as close, maybe now he can fight this without his rook involved. Like knight e4 here, without the rook d8 move. No, then c4 is the problem. That's why he doesn't go knight e4 without the rook on d8. Because now c4, and he has no way to avoid cd. So now we figured out basically what the problems are for black. We have not yet figured out exactly how black could have best played this position, but we're starting to understand what some of the difficulties were that Wei Yi was trying to deal with. And for those who thought that Magnus was just kind of playing an equal kind of position, I'm not sure that the position is equal, right? There's a space advantage and a certain amount of pressure here. Space advantages matter a lot for knights and kings. They don't really matter for rooks as much, not very much. I don't know. I don't know exactly, but this seems kind of nice for white. You can totally see that Magnus was happy to make this queen trade. And then, yeah, just playing like this. Yeah, it seems like whatever Wei Yi was going for didn't quite work out. Magnus is on a high level in these kind of things. Well, it's going to be a little bit more before I understand this position. But I've at least started to. I think my Pro League commentary tomorrow starts between 6 and 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, or 9 and 9:30 p.m. East Coast time. In England, maybe 5 hours later than that, so like middle of the night. And in India, it'll be just about morning time, 6:30 a.m. Or 7 a.m. that it'll start, and it'll go for about 3 hours. So I'm trying to think here a little bit, and I'm going to go on to the So game in a little bit, but before I move on, I'm just trying to see what general brainstorm ideas I have for how black could or should play these positions in general. A5 instead of C5, like in the actual game line with the knight on E4? No, you must mean like as a plan in a while back, huh? Okay, two of you are talking about A5 as a possible move. So it could be like even here, just like a move like A5, right? Gaining space on the queen side. And saying like right now my pieces are placed okay. I'm not totally scared that E6 would crush me. Meanwhile, I get some space dealing with like B4 and C4 options for white. You can also play A4, I think. That doesn't hurt you, right? On move 30. Okay, so you do mean in the game. Move 30. C4. You want to play A5. But now CD is threatening your knight, right? So you don't have time for A takes B4 or anything. And then after you take back here with the pawn, which I think is forced, right? If rook D5, rook E4. If GF4, rook E4. So you have to take back with the pawn, unfortunately. Now, I mean, B5 might be good, but you can also just take this pawn, probably. And we get this kind of a thing. Right, now you're probably wanting to go back like rook E8 and stuff. Yeah, I know the rest of you want to know about a5 before this, but one person has specifically asked if they could still play a5 in this tactical phase, and we're going to get back and spend more time on the other idea. So how good is this? Like here, and I guess like this is how I'm kind of feeling, but then my a pawn's hanging, so maybe rook b3 instead. And here and here. If you don't take on a5, by the way, I'll play rook b5 probably, which will be really good. So something like this. How are we doing here? Well, here I'm kind of gearing up to double rooks on the 7th rank, but there could be some counterplay just in time, right? If the knight moves, there's knight d6. This is not super simple. Yeah. That rook a4 is some serious counterplay. So I could play here. Keeping that rook out. Yeah, rook a4 happens to be good for black there, even though it seems like it should be a good position for white. But you have to take tactics into account, and that rook a4 move was just good. I don't want to deal with it. As if I'm white, I would stop it. And just be very patient here, which is definitely how Magnus plays these kind of positions, by the way. Like super, super patient. You know, stop that counterplay. He's still threatening rook c7. He's still technically up a pawn for the moment. He still has the more active king. Yeah. And yeah, b5 is also good. So the logic behind playing b5, which I thought would also be okay, is basically that with b5, there's only one open file. So if you control the only open file, you don't need to worry about controlling the counterplays. But I can tell you this rook a3 move, for some of you, it might have like an appearance of being a passive move, and you're like, ooh, that's not exactly the right way to play chess. I can tell you that rook a3 is fine, actually. Like, you can attack from here or from here, and everything is still in white's camp. So there's no reason you can't take the pawn and play a rook a3 type move. It's totally good. But I think the b5 move would also be good. So I'm not saying necessarily which one's better, but white's comfortable. Either way, quite comfortable. So yeah, so a5's not going to be good enough here, although it was still kind of interesting. But let's go back and see what people were like a few more people were actually asking about, which is playing this move a5 here. I like this actually at first blush. Kind of gaining some space on the queen side, taking out some of these b4 and c4 ideas, or making them a little bit less good. And also, you know, if the game opens up at some point, this is where your queenside majority is for black. You might want this pawn a little bit closer to queening, just for like counterplay in some tactical variation where things open up. So I'm also thinking that a5 we might follow with a4. I don't know what each of you individually was thinking or planning to do here for black, but I think a4 could also go well here for black, just gaining more space with that pawn. And yeah, I mean, I think Magnus would probably still play like king f3 and f5 and king f4, but you know, what am I doing for black? How ambitious am I? I don't know, maybe rook e7, king f8, and sitting here. Maybe at some point move the knight and play c5. Did we consider moving the knight and playing c5 quickly? Should we consider that? Like here? I mean, the thing is, white can play f5, gaining a tempo, and we don't even want to take on d4. This might be one of the reasons why Wei Yi never played knight e6 in any position in the game, really. Yeah, you can go where you want now, but we've just wasted time. But if I play c5, then knight e6 is the best square for my knight. It's just I don't actually get to stay there because white's happy to play f5. So that's not so great. I'm not excited about that. So maybe just a5. I think neither player has like super fast play here. I think this is a somewhat calm position. A little bit of a potential standoff here. So I played this move just so that if white plays f5 at the wrong time, I could double on it and it would be loose. And my theory is that if white ever wants to play knight f5, fine. He plays knight f5, wins the tempo. I move my rook to one of these squares, and then I just keep playing. So or even rook e6, right? And that the knight's basically blocking f5, which is what they actually want to play. So, yeah, interesting position. This would be an example of a fun position that after like studying this game a little bit, that you would like play this kind of end game against like a friend a couple times, right? You would start out in this position, just practice it a little bit back and forth. I'm going to quickly copy our current PGN. Nope. And just save it so that so I have it for later if we ever post a copy of this video to YouTube or something. And play g6 to stop f5. Yeah, that's a fine question to ask. The thing is that g6 doesn't stop f5. White controls f5 a couple times, and if need be, could like bring a rook to the f file too. So g6 doesn't stop f5. It just says that if f5 gets played, there's more chances for pawn trades. So then ask yourself, Gajanishko, are you as black wanting to trade a pawn with gf? Yeah, and again, I'm not saying on any particular move, but in general, right? Do you want the option to play g takes f5, g takes f5? That's what you have to ask yourself, and then you decide whether or not you want to play g6. But g6 definitely does not stop f5. It fights for control of the square, but not like successfully, not like preventing it, right? So yeah. It also gives white a plan of h4, h5. So if g6 actually stopped f5, then we'd ask ourselves, what else does it introduce in the position? But the moment it doesn't stop f5, so the first question is just, do you want to trade on f5? Hopefully you've thought about it for yourself by now. I will now say my answer is no. As black, I don't want to play gf, because I feel like the f file would be, the g file that I open is more likely used by white. And yeah, and so that's my answer on g6. And it's not a stupid question at all.